So most of the memories that I have are before Jan was actually a research scientist at Yosemite, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on today. Jan grew up in Indiana. He thought he wanted to be a forester, a forest ecologist, and he enrolled at Purdue University and spent 2 years in their forest management program. And then got conifer fever and moved out to Corvallis at Oregon State University, where he finished up a degree in forest management. But in the summers, in between his academic years, he became a smoke jumper and got his feet wet with fire ecology, or excuse me, fire control for 2 summers. His first summer he spent in Oregon, and he recounted to me a story that he had up on the Umatilla National Forest up in northeastern Oregon, where they were jumping on a fire, and as he came down, he was looking at mostly brush. He wondered what the real value was there. But there was this one gigantic old growth ponderosa pine, and they all landed safely except for the supply chute. And it landed in the pine tree. And there was no way to get it down except to cut the pine tree down. So they did that. And Jan began to scratch his head about the idea of aggressive fire control in all situations. There was another Oregon smoke jumper story that was told by an unidentified smoke jumper. They were down on the Rogue River National Forest, and they were jumping on a fire down there. And this time the supply chute made it all the way down, but Jan didn't. He got stuck 100 foot up in a big old Douglas fir tree. He was able to rappel down, but he couldn't get his chute out, and so they had to cut the Douglas fir down to get it. So this was another head scratcher for Jan. Now Jan has always denied that this happened, but the next summer he transferred over to the Bureau of Land Management up in Alaska. And as we all know, the trees are much shorter in Alaska. But while he was in Alaska smoke jumping, he had a real epiphany about fire. He jumped on a tundra fire, and after they landed, it kind of socked in, and the flames were about 1 inch tall, and they were moving along the ground, and they came upon a series of ground nesting birds. And as the fire moved up to the birds hopped off their nests, the fire passed, and the birds hopped back on their nests. And Jan said, you know, fire may be kind of a benign thing, or it might actually be somewhat beneficial. And it was at that point he decided he was going to become a fire ecologist. Unfortunately, when he graduated, something called the U.S. Army got in the way, and Jan enrolled, as many of us did. I didn't, for an unusual reason. I have 3 kidneys, and so I was thrown out of the mix for some reason. Jan spent a year in Vietnam advising South Vietnamese, and then he came back, and he was stationed right here in the Monterey area in Fort Ord. And here's where he met his lovely wife, Margene, and they got married. And one day, Jan was talking to a friend about his interest in fire, and they said, well, why don't you go up and talk to this guy named Harold Biswell at UC Berkeley? So Jan did, and he was really excited about it, and he got back to Fort Ord, and they said, yeah, but we want you for another year. So it wasn't until the fall of '68 that he was able to enroll at UC Berkeley and join the one other fire ecology student who was there at the time, me. A few words about Harold Biswell. Harold was a range ecologist. He graduated from University of Nebraska with the famous grassland ecologist John Weaver. And his first job was with the Forest Service down in Florida, or South Carolina, Georgia, somewhere in there. And down there, of course, those guys never bought into this idea that all fires needed to be suppressed. They were burning all the time. And he saw that, and he saw what some of the beneficial effects were. So when he transferred up to California with the Forest Service, he remembered what he had seen in the Southeast. But he spent most of his early time out there, both with the Forest Service and the University of California, where he transferred to, burning in grasslands and shrublands. Nobody really cared about grasslands and shrublands. But then he got interested in burning in forests, the dry forests of California. And this created a real firestorm. He was ridiculed. He was called Harry the Torch, burn him up Biswell. He had his job threatened. He almost lost his job. The dean was going to fire him. And finally some people came to his defense, and the dean had to come in and apologize to him for that. But it was a tough time. And Jan and I both asked him, why he was so upbeat about things. That most of the criticism that they had of him, it just washed right over his head. It didn't bother him. And he said, boys, he says, be patient. Look how far we've come. And another one of his signatures was field workshops. He would go out in the field once or twice. Margine was there along with us once or twice in the summertime. And Jan and I would dig fire lines, and Harold would light the fire, and he'd invite people from all walks of life. Young students, older students, housewives, professors, and the agency people would show up too. But they would sit in the back and they'd go, oh, it's burning up Biswell, and they'd make faces. It was just comical in a sense. But we learned two things out of that. One was we learned to think on our feet, because Harold would get the fire started, and about halfway through he'd say, Jan, come up here and explain to the group, X or Y or Z. And he would do the same thing with me. So we learned to be kind of like be sharp, think on our feet, and be prepared, because he would never tell us in advance what he was going to ask us. The other thing was that Jan carried through his entire career was the idea of explaining things out in the field. Get out there and actually see the results and what's going on out in the field. Don't sit back in some office and talk about it. And he carried that through his entire career. Back at Berkeley, Jan and I were taking classes, and then I kind of got a wild hair and decided I was going to become a tropical slash and burn ecologist. So I transferred to the University of Hawaii, left Jan all by himself at Berkeley with all these Berkeley radicals. And when I got to Honolulu, I was kind of shocked that I had left a forestry library with probably 50,000 volumes. And at the University of Hawaii, they had a general library that maybe had 50. So, and there was no internet back in those days. This was, 1969. And they had a teletype that if you wanted to see an article, you could get an abstract sent to you. And if you really wanted the whole article, it would take about 3 weeks for it to be mailed to you. And also, I didn't have anybody to talk to. Jan and I had a great time discussing fire stuff and helping each other. There was nobody there to help me. And so I crawled back to Berkeley, and the guy who was a year behind me was now a year ahead of me. We worked and worked very hard. There were a lot of bright people at Berkeley. And the question was, were we the brightest of the bright, or were we the dimmest of the bright? And we didn't really know. So we worked our butts off to make sure that we made it. And there was one class in particular, research methods. You remember Lee Wenzel. He was a young buck back in those days. And he had everybody trembling because he was always on their oral exam committees. And so Jan and I decided, when we take research methods together, we're going to just do an outstanding job, and we're going to get the best grades in the class. And we did. And because of that, when we took our oral exams, Lee Wenzel was actually pretty soft on us. And so that really made it helpful, because some of the other professors weren't so soft. But we did pass. Jan wanted to refine burning prescriptions for mixed conifer forests in the Sierra Nevada. And he always thought he was going to be a forest service biologist. And so he went around to the local forests around Yosemite saying, you know, I've got this great idea of you know, putting in experimental plots and helping you guys out. And the response he got, in his words, were not only did they say no, they said hell no. But there was a park, a national park nearby, Yosemite, that was amenable to his working there. And so they allowed him to put his experimental plots in. He had 4 different subtypes of mixed conifer forest, 5 different fuel moisture levels, 10-hour fuel moisture levels, backing fires, heading fires, and wind as a covariate. And so he went in and he dug all the fire lines himself. He did all the ignitions himself. No Nomex, no red card. And at the end, he was looking at the effects on fuels and vegetation. And when he got finished, he produced recommendations for what the best conditions were for the various subtypes in the mixed conifer forest. It was published a couple of years later as National Park Service Occasional Paper number 2, published by the Washington office. And with a little tweaking, those prescriptions that he developed more than a half century ago are still in place at Yosemite. So he just did one hell of a job. I'm just about done here. I just wanted to make one final comment of something that happened much later in his career and my career, and that was that he helped develop the journal Fire Ecology, and he was editor of the journal for 5 years. And he turned that editorship over to me for another 5 years. And during that 10-year period, the journal became very much more important and well respected. But it wouldn't have happened without a technical editor who was massaging hundreds of manuscripts, and even today helps manuscripts that are written with authors where English is not their first language. And she is here tonight. Her name is Lori Burke, and she has been our technical editor. Thank you, Lori. Jan had a spectacular career in fire ecology and in wilderness management, and other people will be talking about that in just a moment here. He was a great friend to me. We could always take up just where we left off. And if he were around today, he would have said, be patient, think of how far we've come. And as I stand here, I say, Jan, the reason that we have come that far is largely because of efforts of people like you. So thank you.
It really is, it's an honor for me to have the opportunity to talk about someone who honestly, when I reflect on it, was really important in my life. And to be connected back with this whole group of you, with AFE, a place that I had a long legacy with, and later in my career kind of wandered away, so to speak. So it's great to be here and to see this work, a lot of it, as Jim said, reflected from the efforts of Jan to continue that effort. You know, it's an opportunity to talk about specific things professionally that highlight Jan's career. We talk about publications and impacts that he had on this world of fire ecology. But when I think about Jan, I think about some really simple moments where he had a really significant impact on me and on my career. I think about the first time that I met Jan, and I can't remember the specifics of the why and the who, but there was this meeting organized. It was an invitational meeting in Park City, Utah. And it was this collection of the most prominent people in the world of fire science at that time. And Jim was there, Tom Swetnam, Mark Finney, all these people that I really looked up to. And then there's me. I have no idea how I got invited, why I was invited, but there is me in and amongst these people that I think of as legendary. And I show up and I have, admittedly, this sort of heightened sense of intimidation and a question of, like, why am I there? How am I going to contribute? And I remember a couple specific things. One is we did these introductions. There were multiple people. I had never met Jan. I knew who he was. I'd read papers he'd written. And several people amongst this prominent crowd identified Jan as like the person. Everything I know about fire ecology, I learned from Jan at Wagtendonk. And immediately, again, I'm in this sort of state of concern about who am I and why am I here? And I spent, if you've been in situations like that where you sort of feel like you're underwater a little bit, I spend the first day quiet and not sure what to do and how to contribute. And I finally said something, and I can't remember what it was, but Jan was the person who acknowledged me, who said something to the effect of, like, you know, thank you, or that, good idea, young guy. And I remembered that. I for the rest of the meeting, that affected me, of that feeling of affirmation from someone that I respected, that made me feel like I have a place here. And I never forgot that, honestly, as I advanced in my own career and found myself in those situations with people who maybe didn't know why they were there and how they could contribute. And I got that, honestly, from Jan. I left that meeting and fortunately had the opportunity after that to interact with Jan a lot over the preceding 20 years. And it started with what was, if some of you don't know, back in deep history, there was this thing called CAFE that was what now is your organization of AFE. It was started by this guy who I think back of, Scott was heavily involved, and other people, Carl, and this guy Neil Sukihara, who had amazing vision, amazing energy, and just this remarkably positive outlook on what we could do as fire ecologists. And it started out very informally. A bunch of us would get together in a room in Sacramento and talk about nerdy things related to fire effects, fire ecology. And it really is the birthplace of where you guys are at today. And it was Jan. Neil was an amazing person if you don't know him. But it was Jan who really took, as I remember it, Andy was there, like, took this next step of vision to something that AFE is today. Beyond California, beyond the United States. This idea that we need to have a way of accrediting people, that we need a journal for the science that we think is important. And it was Jan who really drove that in the end. Somewhere in the middle of that, there was a decision, we need a fire ecology text for California. And we were inspired by Jim Agee and the work he had done in the Pacific Northwest. And as that idea was being formulated, people, again, of great prominence, people I looked up to, like Jan and John Keeley and Carl Skinner, the state kind of gets divided up into bioregions, and people take on these assignments. And there's this giant hole in the middle of the state that is the Central Valley. And no one has any interest in dealing with the Central Valley. I'm this kind of prescribed fire guy, burning grasslands around, and somehow it winds up on my desk as the last person willing to think about fire in the Central Valley of California. And it's during that exercise, we have lots of meetings talking about how we're going to describe fire ecology in these bioregions, how we're going to standardize this text, again, with a lot of recognition of the work that Jim had done on his book. And I always remember in those discussions, as we talked about how to formulate this idea, Jan would often say, when I said something, I defer to the gentleman from the great Central Valley. And it again was one of those moments of sort of affirmation from someone that I had the highest level of respect for. It was important to me. I spent the last half of my career working for the National Park Service. And it was an amazing experience, a place that for me, as a fire practitioner, it was the place that aligned most closely in my values, and it gave me these amazing experiences. One of which was spending a lot of time in Yosemite National Park, where Jan worked, and spending significant time with Jan in discussions about fire planning and fire application. And I also, during my time in Yosemite, got to know Kent. And Kent, and as an extension, Jan, represents this kind of unique thing about Yosemite in my career. If you talk to people in the Yosemite Fire Program, so many of them, and Kent's an example of it, it's not a place where they work. It's a place that they're from. It's their home. It's the people that grew up in Yosemite, that played Little League in Yosemite Valley, and learned how to ski at Badger Pass, and formed that connection to place that in our careers, it's something that has largely been lost. We move, we go the places that our career takes us. And to have that lifelong connection to place and how important that is. And I used to take the opportunity. Jan worked down the hill in El Portal, I worked up in the valley, and I'd go to Jan's office and talk to him about whatever. And I remember one time going down there to talk to, and I had some specific thing I needed to get Jan's input on. And I walk in his office, and immediately he's kind of beaming in this fatherly sort of adulation. And he's like, the coolest thing happened. My son Kent just came in, and he had this idea about FRID, about how to analyze FRID, the fire return interval departure that we used so much back in the early 2000s. And he was so kind of overwhelmed with this emotion, this rare thing that happens, right? Where your son or daughter shares your professional avocation and passion. And he was so moved by that. We never got to what I needed to talk to him about. They had this whole thing about Ken. And, you know, I was fortunate, I eventually pulled Kent out of Yosemite to come work for us in the region office. And it was an effort because it is that connection to place. It's that idea of how important a place like Yosemite and the Sierra Nevada mountains are to us personally and then to our work. And I think about that with Jan. I think about that moment. And all these moments for me with Jan, I'm sure he had no idea how he affected me. And again, I think about that as I reflect on his life, and I think about my own career, my own life. It was a year ago, this month, that I lost my father. And I had retired, but stayed in contact, and I had multiple conversations with Ken as Jan's health was failing. And we talked about a lot of things, but we talked about legacy, like how do you honor someone as important to us as Jan? And I thought about it with my own father. And I don't know that I had an answer for Ken. We went back and forth on a number of things. But I resonate with what Jim said. It's about how do we honor someone as important to us as Jan. He was a person that I valued so much in the fire ecology community because he had this inherent sense that I shared of fire is a good thing. We don't know specifically what's going to happen on any particular prescribed burn or wildland fire, but we have to believe. Jan had this experience he shared with me of going to Tall Timbers, being in the Southeast and having people there. It was like receiving the gospel. It was like this religious experience of understanding fire as a valuable thing. So as I think about Jan, I think about honoring that remarkable legacy. It's about the commitment. It's about the things that you guys are doing this week. It's about this commitment of the right fire, the right kind of fire in the right place at the right time. So thank you all. Thanks, Sean.
Everybody, thanks for coming here for Jan. Certainly speaking for the Yosemite Park folks, Jan was an important part of what we do in the park. And Jan started this backpacking trip a few years ago. He thought it'd be a great idea to get the park leadership out with academics like Scott Stevens and Brandon Collins and Lacey Hankin and Joe Meyer, their chief of staff in the back, can attest to this. So we go out in the Illilouette drainage, which if you consider the Sierra Nevada, it's probably the most natural drainage in the whole Sierra Nevada as far as fire being able to have its way in the ecosystem, in the wilderness. And we are continuing that. You know, Jan fell ill, he couldn't go in 2020, and we picked it back up and we started it all up. And this year, we call that trip, that annual trip, and hopefully someday some of you will join us. We call it Burning Jan. And so that will be one of his legacies in Yosemite.
Burning Jan?
Burning Jan. So, there's a lot of people that Jan certainly touched their lives, and a lot of them were in Yosemite. So I thought it'd be fun to contact a few of them and get some stories from them. So I'll just go ahead and read what they sent me. First one's from Steve Bottai. Jan and I worked together for over 15 years in Yosemite, then continued to collaborate on fire management issues for another 19 years when Steve was the National Park Service National Fire Program Manager at NIFC. And his research scientist, Jan was a research scientist at Yosemite. It was a productive relationship, to say the least. Jan's calm, steady guidance and dedication to establishing scientific, ecosystem-based management in the National Park Service greatly influenced the transformation of wildland fire management, not just in the National Park Service, but throughout America. During his career, his ideas on the use of prescribed fire in naturally occurring wildland fires to help restore natural ecosystems moved from highly controversial, heretical concepts in the 1970s to sound ecological management program. Every step of the way in establishing ecosystem-based fire management throughout all of Yosemite, Jan was always there to expand scientific understanding and counsel resource managers, park rangers, superintendents, regional directors to stay the course. Jan was truly a man for his times. Few of us are fortunate enough to see that our careers resulted in not just promoting scientific theories, but fundamental changes in the way people interact with the natural world. Of course, my relationship with Jan was one of lasting friendship as well as work allies. Jan was always serious and thoughtful, respectful, restrained in criticism, and optimistic in the long view of life. During our many hikes and camping trips in Yosemite, backcountry, we observed fires, sat around campfires, discussed wilderness preservation, and how to move the management needle, even in tiny increments, toward a more enlightened policy. I could see that Jan, by sitting there and touching the earth that we were trying to manage, was not just thinking in terms of objective or abstract scientific principles, but in terms of personal connection to the natural world. Maybe that is what made his message so powerful. He believed that in the end, knowledge would prevail, and that those wilderness campfire friendships were even more important than the scientific knowledge that those trips produced. His legacy will live on even through those who never had the pleasure of working with him like I did. Again, that was Steve Bottai, who was kind of Jan's field general, carrying out a lot of the prescribed burns that started out in the 70s. And now for something completely different from Eldine Clark. Jan was not just a pin-headed scientist. Jan was also a Boy Scout leader and a volunteer fire chief for the El Portal community. Jan came out one time after I'd taken over as scoutmaster and explained why he decided he could no longer be scoutmaster. "I'm over-organizing my bag of bags." He had a bag for everything: sleeping bag, camp stove bag, pots bag, you name it. Jan said, "I think I'm over-organizing." Jan introduced to Yosemite a relight policy, which was fairly controversial in 1999 during the Kibbe Ridge fire, when a lightning fire was suppressed early in the fire season and then reignited later in the early fall, mostly for smoke and political reasons. Jan's first plots were at the Stud Horse Turn in Wawona. At one point, Jan had found a study meant to show fire was detrimental to watersheds. Jan suspected fire was beneficial for watersheds. Jan collaborated with Scott Stevens and other UC Berkeley researchers to develop the data that shows after 50 years of managing backcountry fires, the flow of water in the Merced River, even during drought years, has increased flows over 5%. That's it for Eldine. And now for someone who's in the audience, Carolyn Lansing. Noble. Jan was my formal mentor from 1997 to 2003 and an informal mentor for all time. My formal mentorship began January 1, 1997, which happened also to be the date of the great rain on snow flooding event that left Yosemite Valley shut off from the outside world for weeks. I called Jan at 7 a.m. to relay that I couldn't drive from the valley to El Portal for my first day of work. When I told him why, he exclaimed that he was needed to go pre-position a vehicle on the other side of the river right away. So I'd like to take some small credit for sounding that warning that allowed Jan to be the El Portal transportation logistics hero during the great floods of 1997. Way to go, Carolyn. Still continuing with Carolyn. Jan and I thrived on manager versus research trash-talking banter, and it was like taking candy from a baby to rile him up. By talking about driving into the wilderness to fix a weather station, or taking engines into the Merced Grove for prescribed burns. We had a continuous and contentious dialogue on the decision process for suppressing versus managing wildfires in Yosemite. While Jan acknowledged that policies and guidelines needed to exist, he didn't miss many opportunities to criticize them. And he certainly had no sympathy regarding the woes of a duty officer versus the ecological importance of allowing a fire to burn in the wilderness. One year, I was responsible for making a rather subjective call on suppressing a small wildfire at the top of Ribbon Falls, which is right next to El Capitan, using the old extenuating social and political considerations clause that we used when we didn't want the headache of managing a high-profile fire all summer. This decision was followed by an immediate lecture from Jan, where you could basically substitute every ignition is sacred into the Monty Python tune, every sperm is sacred. From that day forward, Jan would shame my rash suppression decision by greeting me with, "Remember the ribbon!" These little stories hopefully highlight that Jan was steadfastly principled and yet endlessly approachable. He never wavered in his beliefs, yet he showed a patience, endless patience, grace, and humor in all conversations. His "Remember the Ribbon" cry followed me for 25 more years in fire management decision-making, and I hope at least some of those decisions made him proud. I could not have asked for a better mentor. Thank you, Carolyn. Jan memories from Garrett Dickman, who is still currently an employee at Yosemite and probably in this room, so there he is. I started working in Yosemite as Jan was settling into his emeritus role, which seemed work-like to me, except he was somewhat excited about the meetings he attended. Sometimes we could rope Jan in to provide opening remarks at a conference, or even to attend a high-stakes meeting where he's the only one with the knowledge and wisdom to put everything into context. I always thought those moments when Jan espoused wisdom to be special, but I didn't really understand the full breadth of what Jan was providing until later. Now, in seeing his life's work, I just don't think they make people like that anymore. People don't live that many amazing lives as this one. But that's not how I interacted with Jan. When asked, he gave advice or giant breadcrumbs about scientific and management questions. But he was just as interested in talking about adventures in the canyon and what to do about toddlers. He was modest, even though it was impossible to hide all that he had done. As I hear more Jan stories and read more of his papers, I feel lucky that I get to put them in the context of the person that was Jan, and be thankful for the amazing gifts that he gave us in showing us the way. Thank you, Garrett. Jan memories from Kelly Singer, and Kelly Singer is my deputy wildland fire chief, still in Yosemite, and here it goes. I grew up in Yosemite. I didn't interact with Jan much because I was a valley kid. His son Kent and I became good friends over the years. I was continually in Kent's office, forcing him to make my project maps, always at the last minute. I would drop by Jan's office and talk to him about what projects we had in the hopper and what we were working on. He knew every rock and tree in this park, and he did. He's hiked every trail in Yosemite. We had some setbacks in our fire program over the last couple decades. After the Big Meadow escape prescribed fire, I lost my confidence as a burn boss. After that, we had a drought and bug kill, and it was very difficult to implement burns because they were coupled with enormous scrutiny and not screw up. I was trying to implement some burns in the Soup Bowl area, just south of where Jan did some of his first pioneer burning in the Studhorse Ridge, Wawona area of the park. I was receiving a lot of criticism from the public and our cooperators at that time. Remember, this is during a drought and a bug kill. I reached out to Jan and asked if we were doing the right thing. He said we should keep producing those fuels under a cooler prescription and keep up the pace. I don't think I could have continued as a burn boss after Big Meadow without Jan's everlasting support of our fire program and the ground pounders. Thank you, Kelly. And now for me. I arrived in Yosemite in June of 2020, and within a couple weeks, I made an appointment to see the guru and godfather of fire in Yosemite, and probably in the country at that point. I wanted to do my job well, and so I thought, why not go hear from the wise one? And so I showed up at Jan's office up in the White House in El Portal, the research station across the river from the rest of El Portal, and walked into his office, and we had our, little chit chat and greetings and all that. And we both sat down, and I got right to the point. Jan, I'm the new prescribed fire and fuel specialist here in Yosemite. What's my job? What should I be doing? And Jan paused for a little bit, just a little bit. And I thought, oh, he's winding up. I'm going to get this great lecture on what we should be doing in Yosemite. And so he spoke. Just get fire out there. I thought to myself, that's it? There's got to be more. He goes, yeah, just get fire out there on the landscape. And I walked away. That was all the advice I needed. We started burning. 20 years later, I came back to Yosemite. And I was going to retire out of my job as the fire director in Boise, but Robin kind of tempted me with, hey, you could go back and get the program ramped back up. I thought, why not? So right when I got there, Joe Meyer, who's in the back there, he invited me to come out with Jan to go look at some land that might be suitable to become part of the park someday. And so this was my opportunity to reconnect with Jan after all those years. And this was in the middle of the pandemic, so there weren't that many opportunities to go face to face with people. And so we drove around, looked at it, and then finally we're driving back, and I go, Jan, remember 20 years ago when I got here and I asked you what I should be doing? And you said, just get fire out there? And I said, that kinda. And I go, well, what's my job now? And he goes, oh, just get fire out there, but be careful. And so, let's see here. Well, when Jan died in 2022, we had a fire going in the park called the Washburn Fire. And that started right underneath the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. And that was an area that Jan had started doing a lot of prescribed burning in the 70s, and then got carried on through the 80s, 90s. Mike Beasley in the back there was a big part of that. And that fire, the firefighters were able to keep the fire mostly out of the Mariposa Grove. No large giant sequoias were lost in that fire, even though previous years we'd seen 20% of the giant sequoias, almost 20% of the giant sequoias killed in the Sierra Nevada. But we were able to do that because of the history that Jan started there with the prescribed burning. So they kept it out of the grove, but the fire was a monster. I mean, we were watching VLATs drop retardant, and the retardant not really doing anything to stop that fire. So it started marching towards the community of Wawona, towards Stud Horse Ridge, where Jan started a lot of his pioneer work, doing prescribed burns and that. Garrett Dickman, who is there too. Garrett had done a fuels project just that earlier that year that provided a bit of a buffer for firefighters, the hotshot crews. And so they were able to burn that out successfully and down to the Merced River and save the community of Wawona from burning up. And Jan died that night. They were burning through the stud horse units of his. So the next morning, after we got the news of Jan's passing, I called Kent, expressed my condolences. And during that phone conversation, we kind of joked or hoped that Jan's hand was on those torches with the hotshot crews burning that line out successfully. So he meant so much to us in the park, still does, always will. His spirit's guiding our torches to this day. We're out there burning, and it's not a day go by that I don't think about Jan. And hope to see y'all on the Burning Jan backpack trip next summer. Thank you.
Wow, that was something. So just to hear these stories, I've just got more things in my memory to think about. Heard about Illilouette Creek Basin, place that Jan worked for many, many years. It's actually an incredible place to actually go and visit. But from a research standpoint, it is unique in California. If you're going to talk about a place in California, relatively large, not giant, 45,000 acres or so, where fire is actually working and doing the work it needs to, I always point to Illilouette Creek. It's a place that basically is just out there. It's just remarkable. Every time I go there, it gives me hope. It gives me hope of what we could do. And Jan's hand's all over that. One time I was talking to Jan on one of those backpacking trips that Dan just mentioned. And he said, you know, that 74 fire, that was a Mount Star King fire. It was the first one. The first one that they basically decided they were going to work with. And it got pretty big. A lot bigger than I think they thought it would. And Jan's out there, Steve Bottai's out there, Park's out there. And then all of a sudden there's this call comes in somehow. They want some people to go to the valley. And for some reason Jan gets summoned to go to the valley. So he goes to the valley, fire's going on. Turns out Horace Albright's down there. So Albright used to be the former director of the National Park Service. He's actually a UC Berkeley grad. And Jan told me he went up to Albright in the valley, and Albright grabbed his collar and started shaking him. Says, for God's sake, what is going on in the park? Why is this valley all smoked out? Are you responsible for this? And Jan said he was just bewildered. He couldn't believe that the former director was actually on his collar giving him some cred. So he just kind of said, no, or something like that. He was kind of really taken aback. But Albright just literally grabbed his shirt collar and just said, what is going on in this park? Why are you burning up in there and creating all this smoke? You need to stop. And thank goodness the superintendent said no. So that was one experience he told me once out there in the backpacking trip I'll never forget. I bet that was something. You know, actually we have an Albright lecture at Berkeley now in my college. It's actually endowed. So every time someone gives the Albright lecture, it's been going on for decades. Every time I think about it, I kind of smile. I think about Jan and Albright in the valley and actually having that little interaction. Okay. Another thing Jan told me, I'm not sure exactly the year, but Biswell retired, Harold Biswell retired around 1972, and he actually applied for a faculty job at UC Berkeley. And it was an open search. It actually didn't have a specific area. It was basically somewhat broad. And there were a couple of people applied that were policy. I think there was an economics person, and Jan actually applied, got interviewed. And he interviewed, things were going pretty well. He was excited about it. And he said he went to a couple senior faculty offices, one in particular, he never told me who. I wish he almost would have. Okay. and he went into this office, sat down, had a little conversation, and then the person said, we don't need another Harold Biswell on this faculty. And just said that right to his face. We don't need another Harold Biswell on this faculty. And he was really taken aback at first. But then he told me it didn't take a long time. He said that was a badge of honor. That was a badge of honor. That he actually was called to task for Harold Biswell. And he thought of that through the rest of his career as actually a badge of honor. That was pretty cool. A couple other things. We heard about the Fire in California Ecosystems book. You know, it was Neil Sugihara who was the first editor of that, 2006. And then 2018, the second edition, Jan became the first author or the first editor. Andy, several folks in the room, all of you working on this thing. Jan was pretty driven. I remember Neil, just like we heard a moment ago, I love Neil, but he was just a little bit less organized. So that 06, that 06 book took a long time. And I wasn't on that first book. I wasn't a co-editor. I was on the second. But Jan just said, chop, chop, chop. We got to get this thing done. We're getting going. Everybody online. Aren't you done? Man, get going. And he was this editor, this editor that just had this incredible energy, but he was a task guy. And I kind of appreciated that. Then he told me, he had the whole giant file. He did a global search on disturbance. He hates the word disturbance. So he would say, fire is not a disturbance. Fire is a process or a perturbation. Maybe in some cases it could be thought of as a disturbance if it's burning uncharacteristically and causing damage. So he did a global search in the whole bloody book, and he changed it all. And I know a few of the co-authors were not too thrilled. But that's okay. He was the main editor. That's fine and dandy, right? So I thought that was kind of fun as well. Fire Ecology was the editor, we heard, and he was also Mr. Editor. He'd get papers of mine. Scott, you don't really write that well. So he'd be changing all the text. I'm going, God, give me a damn break. So he made it a little better, but he was always in there trying to fix things. Brandon and I were working on this together, and we go, good grief, Jan, give me whatever. But I loved him for that. He certainly put his heart and soul into it in a big time. We heard about his smoke jumper escapades, in his work. He told me once that he was also on another jump in Oregon, and they jumped on a ridge, and there was a ponderosa pine tree there burning. They got on the ground so he didn't get stuck. So they took their hand tools, and there was just a little creeping fire around this pine, and they all did their work. They put it out, and then lo and behold, they realized they had no matches, and they had to spend the night. And they had no way to keep warm or to heat up their food. So he was saying, this is not a good time. Why are we out here on this ridge putting out a fire on top of a ponderosa pine, not harming anybody? And by the way, we're cold, and we can't actually have any hot food that night. I thought that was pretty funny too. Certainly, he came from the smoke jumper, and then he became a leader in fire research. Everybody knew him. Internationally, I knew him. I admired him greatly, and he became this person that really set the field for 50 years. That's a quite amazing outcome, and we have to salute him. I heard about his illness, like many of you, and then I decided, I talked to Margene. I wondered if I could come up and see him and just start to talk to him a little bit. And it was a short time there. She said, sure, come up. So it was in Winters. So Margene actually grew up in Winters, farmhouse, lived there many years. And she said, come on up to Winters. And then got there, we go outside, usually around 9 in the morning, spend about 3 or 4 hours and just chat with him. And the first time I got there, I knew Jan was ill, but he was basically the same to me. Just amazing. Conversation, voice, energy, smile. It just felt like it was Jan. It was just Jan right across from me. So I went up there about every 3 weeks for a while. Just to sit there and chat with him, have a little conversation. Once in a while, the grandkids were there. Kira was there running around, the grandkids running around. Once in a while, there was a peacock running around. That's okay. So he'd talk about the peacock or whatever. But we talked a lot about just fire, talked about the park, talked about the ideas of accomplishing work. He was very proud of Yosemite and him working there for so many years. He's very proud of his family in a big way. And this really was, those conversations were just cherished by me. I just be able to talk to him, what he had actually accomplished. He's very modest, just like everybody said, very modest. But he just had this thrill to talk about Yosemite. And he would say, Scott, I've been working in Yosemite for 20 years or so. Brandon joined me very early on. He says, keep working there. Park needs good science. Park needs good science. It's something that I think is so important. And I think every time I came, he almost said the same thing. Park needs good science. So I told him, we're going to work there for a while, Jan. And you know what? There's actually some people already working there now that came in with us, and now they're independent. They're working there themselves, right? So there's this new turnover, Gabrielle, others. So he was thrilled to see that, but he had such a longing for the park and trying to keep that place going and that scientific inquiry that certainly he'd done for so long. So that was really remarkable. Getting close to the end for my remarks, but if you go to the AFE website, there's a video there that actually has been archived, and it's a video of Neil Sugihara and Jan at one of the conferences, I don't remember the one, and they're talking about the early establishment of AFE. And like Robin said, and everybody said, Neil, I wish he was here. I should have reached out to him, but Neil goes first. So he's talking about things and talking about the organization, saying this is what we did, and Neil was instrumental in all of this. Jan comes next. And he says, yeah, he's actually the idea guy. I get things done. So he was basically took kind of this idea of a California Association for Fire Ecology, Association for Fire Ecology, and he was the guy that was thinking, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And of course, he put his own energy into it as well. So they go through the conversation. At the very end, there's one question in the video, and it's a question for Jan. And someone from the audience, I don't know who, says, you know, if Harold Biswell was back there, what would he say today? And Jan answers, he goes, you know, just like Jim said, just like everybody said, he said, you know, Biswell would be smiling. He'd be happy. He would basically say, look how far we've come. You know, look how far we've come. And all this great work. Look at the energy, you know, look what's going on. So I thought about that for a moment. I said, you know what? If Jan was right back there, he'd be standing up. He'd be smiling. He would say the same thing. He would say, look how far we've come. We've done a lot of good work together. Keep working at it. And I think he would just praise this idea of AFE and everybody here. So my last comment is, we miss you, my friend. Thank you.